الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, last lesson we took Bab Sifat as-Salah, which is the chapter that speaks about the description of Salah. And we stopped up until where we're going to begin today, where the Shaykh Rahimahullah, he speaks about the makruhat of Salah, the things that are makruh in Salah, disliked. And when speaking about the makruhat, we always say that the makruh, this is a principle, that makruh is no longer makruh if you are in need to do it. So, if you are in need of committing a makruh, then it is no longer makruh in your circumstance. He says, rahimahullah, he says, وَكُرِهَ فِيهَا. Yani, he's going to start listing the makruhat of salah. He says, التفات ونحوه بلا حاجة. The first makruh of salah is for the person to tilt his head or body from the qibla. As we said in last lesson, the sunnah is that he keeps his eyes on the place of his sujood. That's where he looks. However, it is makruh for the person to tilt his head around and to look around whilst he is praying. The Prophet ﷺ says, هو اختلاس يختلسه الشيطان من صلاة بني آدم. The Prophet ﷺ says that when the abd turns around in salah and starts to look around and wanders around with his eyes, that is a portion of the salah that shaitan takes away from the abd. However, like we said, if I'm in need of committing the makruh is no longer makruh in my case. So let's say that I'm praying and child is about to fall. So I look. Is that makruh in my case? No, in my case it's not makruh, because I'm in need of tilting my head to check if the child is going to fall or not. Also, last lesson, remember we said that if we are in a case of battle, then you're allowed to look at the enemy rather than the place of sujood. And the reason is because when the eyes are no longer focused on mawdi' al-sujood, that impacts your khushu'. It impacts the khushu'. When the person is looking around with his eyes, then his qalb, his heart, will also be busy with what's around him. And he's no longer with the salah. And just imagine if you were invited by a king. You were invited for a king, and how long you're preparing to meet this king. Then when you get to the king, you start to look around everywhere else other than him. You wouldn't do it with a malik min muluk ad-dunya. Why would you do that with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Then he says, وَإِقْعَاءٌ. The second makruh, he says, is al-iq'a'. Al-iq'a' is a type of seating in salah, which is makruh. And how it is for the person to lay his 2 feet flat on the ground. Facing the other way. So he's sitting with both of his feet, yani the top of his feet are flat on the ground. And he is sitting on his heels. Then that is makruh. That is makruh. Do you understand how that is? Okay, you don't understand? Come, we're going to use you to demonstrate. He's going to demonstrate. Come. No, just come there. Go and sit down. No. Sit. How you sit in salah? How do you sit in salah? Like that. Now, both your feet, lay them flat. And he's sitting on his heel. That is makruh. That's makruh. Do you see it? How are you supposed to sit? Were you here last lesson? How are you supposed to sit? Just like that. That's how you're supposed to sit. So that jalsa is makruh. That is makruh. The third, he says, وَافْتِرَاشُ ذِرَاعَيْهِ سَاجِدًا. For the person when he's in sujood, to lay his arms flat on the ground. To lay them flat on the ground when he's in sujood. The Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith of Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, he says, اعتدلوا في السجود ولا يبسط أحدكم ذراعيهم بساط الكلب. The Prophet ﷺ says, do not lay your arms flat on the ground just like the dog. When the dog sits, how does it lay its arms? Flat on the ground. Flat on the ground. Therefore, that is makruh. طيب, someone's saying, but I'm tired. I've been praying for long. We say, what's the alternative that we give him? No, it's fard. He says, I can't keep my hands up. It's tiring. We say, in the case that he can't raise them, then he places them on his knee. He places his elbows on his knee. But he doesn't place it on the ground. That's makruh. But if he is tired and he's in need, then he places it on. Sometimes, after a long day of work and this is that, it's not always easy. So you place it on your knee. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Ista'inu bil-rukab." Ista'inu bil-rukab. And seek help from your knees if you can't lift them off the ground. Then he says, "Wa'abath." The next makruh is al-abath, for the person to fiddle. Whether he's fiddling with his thobe, or he's fiddling with his hair, he's fiddling with his beard, whatever he's fiddling with, shouldn't fiddle in salah. And same what we said before. If you were to meet a king, are you going to start fiddling with your own clothes and everything? No, you're going to be full focus on him. And because this fiddling and touching, it leads again for khushu' to be less, because you're not focused with the salah. One moment you're focused with your thobe, another moment you're focused with your beard, another moment focused with your hair. So you should keep movement to a minimum. Question at the end. Write it down. Then he says, وَتَخَصُّرْ. The next makruh is what we call at-takhassur, which is for the person to pray with his hands on his hips like this. Like this. That's takhassur. And the reason that this is makruh, Aisha radiallahu anha, she narrated that is the fi'l of the Yahud. That's what the Yahud used to do. And the second reason they say it's makruh is because it is a pose of the mutakabbirin. That when someone stands like this, it's a sign of takabbur. How can you stand like this in salah? Then he says, وَفَرْقَعَةُ أَصَابِعِ. The next thing which is makruh is for the person to click his finger in salah. Clicking his finger. Also that's because it's min al-abath. There's a hadith which is weak. لا تفرقع أصابعك وأنت في الصلاة. It's weak, but that doesn't take away that movement disturbs from khushu' and takes the focus away from the salah. Then he says, وَتَشْبِيكُهَا. Tashbik is for the person to put his fingers together in salah. The reason that now this karaha is in 3 stages. Number 1, it's makruh on your way to the masjid, and it becomes more makruh in the masjid, and it becomes even more makruh in salah. Tashbik al-asabi', for you to put your fingers through like this. Yes, like that. The reason being this, the ulama, they try to find the reason. Some of them, they said that because it brings about sleep, and it makes you tired, and then you're no longer in energy for salah. That's possible. But the Prophet ﷺ didn't mention a reason. He says, لا تشبك أصابعك. Then he says, وكونه. طيب, how about after salah? After salah in the masjid, can you do that? Huh? Yes, you can. Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith of Dhul Yadayn's famous hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, after the salah, Abu Hurairah described, he says, فَجَلَسَ فَشَبَّكَ بَيْنَ أَصَابِعِهِ. That the Prophet ﷺ sat like this after the salah. Then he says, وَكَوْنُهُ حَاقِنًا وَنَحْوُهُ. The next makruh is for the person to start the salah whilst he is desperate to go to the toilet. And the karaha is only if you start the salah whilst you're in that state. It's not makruh if you start, you're not desperate. Then in the salah you became desperate. They say it is makruh if you enter the salah whilst you are desperate. The Prophet ﷺ says, لا صلاة بحضرة طعام ولا وهو يدافعه الأخبثان. The Prophet ﷺ says that the person shouldn't pray if he is hungry and there is food. And the second case, if he is desperate to go to the toilet. And again, that's because it takes away from khushu'. There's one case where it's not makruh. And we say it's wajib for him to pray, even if he's desperate. Yeah. When the time's about to run. So let's say the person, it takes him 3 minutes, let's say, to pray Fajr, for example. He woke up, checked the time, there's 3 minutes left for shuruq. So what did he do? And he's desperate at the same time. We say to him, you make wudu, you pray, even if you're desperate. Even if you're desperate. Same with food. If food is available, you can't say, no, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat first, let the time go out. No, if you're about to miss the salah, then it's wajib for you to pray in that state. Then he says, وَتَائِقًا لِطَعَامٍ وَنَحْوِهِ وَتَائِقًا لِطَعَامٍ وَنَحْوِهِ. If the person is hungry and and there is food presented, then it is makruh for him to pray if the food is there, if the food is available. The Prophet ﷺ said, لَا صَلَاةَ بِحَضْرَةِ طَعَامٍ, that there is no salah whilst the food is on the table. And the Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا حَضَرَ الْعَشَاءُ وَالْعِشَاءُ فَابْدَأُوا بِالْعَشَاءِ. That if Isha time comes and Isha is on the table, meaning dinner, then start with your dinner. Start with the dinner. Again, that's because you should go into salah with khushu'. But if the person is about to pray and he can see the corner of his eye on the table that there's a nice big platter waiting for him, then how is he going to pray? Especially if he's hungry. If he's hungry, he's going to keep looking. And he's going to keep thinking, he might rush the salah. You never know. So look at this is what we call maqasid al-sharia, objectives of sharia. That in order for him to perfect his salah, we say to him, no problem, delay it, eat first, or go to the toilet first, so that salah can be complete. Then he says, obviously he didn't mention all the makruhat. This is some of the makruhat, the main ones, but there's other makruhat. Then he says, وَإِذَا نَابَهُ شَيْءٌ سَبَّحَ رَجُلٌ وَصَفَّقَتِ امْرَأَةٌ بِبَطْنِ كَفِّهَا عَلَى ظَهْرِ الْأُخْرَى. Now, if during the salah, the person is in need of speaking to someone, or telling someone something, or warning someone from something, then what does he do? He says, الرجل, the man, he uses tasbih. So, he's in salah, and he sees, for example, child is about to fall, and his wife is in the room, she can't see. He says, Subhanallah, Subhanallah, so that she can go and see what's going on. Similarly, if he needs to tell the Imam made a mistake in the salah, then what do? Say Subhanallah until he realizes the mistake he's made. How about in the case of the women, they don't say Subhanallah, they clap. How do they clap? Just like that, and it shouldn't be too loud, not like that. So as her hands are like this, she hits lightly on her. She does this to make whoever's around her aware of a child is about to fall, or someone's knocking on the door, whatever it is. But she needs to make someone aware of something. Then he says, وَيُزِيلُ بُصَاقًا وَنَحْوَهُ بِثَوْبِهِ وَيُبَاحُ فِي غَيْرِ مَسْجِدٍ عَنْ يَسَارِهِ وَيُكْرَهُ أَمَامَهُ وَيَمِينَهُ. Now if the person during salah, he needs to spit as in, for example, phlegm or whatever it is, he needs to spit. In the masjid, he says that he does it in his thawb, and he doesn't do it on the ground in the masjid. In the masjid, he shouldn't do it on the ground. He does it in his thawb. Then he says, وَيُبَاحُ فِي غَيْرِ مَسْجِدٍ. If he's not in a masjid, then he's praying. If he wants to spit, he spits on his left side. And he doesn't spit in front of him or on his right side. The Prophet ﷺ says that if one of you is in salah, the hadith in Bukhari, if one of you is in salah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of him. So he shouldn't spit in front of him. So he should spit to the left side. Then he says, وَيُكْرَهُ أَمَامَهُ وَيَمِينَهُ. So it's makruh for him to spit in front of him or on his right side. Then he says, he moves on and he says فصل وجملة أركانها 14. Now he's going to mention أركان الصلاة. Now in Salah we have, let's say, 4 things. Number 1, we have shurut, conditions, and we took that. Conditions of Salah. The second, we have arkan. Arkan meaning pillars. And then we have wajibat, things which are compulsory. And then we have sunan. Now, what I'm going to explain now is going to be beneficial for the next chapter we're about to take. Now, the rukn, a pillar. A pillar, the person is never excused for leaving it. Whether he leaves it forgetfully, or he leaves it unintentionally, or he leaves it intentionally, or he leaves it forgetfully, or he leaves it because he didn't know that it's a pillar. We say the pillar is never excused. A pillar, rukn, is never excused, never forgiven. So he must come with that pillar. The second, we have wajibat. Wajib is compulsory, but it's a grade lower than a rukn. A rukn is more wajib. And then wajib is compulsory. The compulsory actions, if the person forgets it, then he can make it up through sujood sahl. And if the person is jahil that is wajib, then his salah is not batil. However, if he leaves it intentionally, then his salah is invalid. Then we have sunan. Sunan, if the person leaves it intentionally, then there's nothing upon him. So we have arkan. What's the hukm of the rukn? Someone summarize what I said. Rukn, what's the hukm? It can never be left off. Whether it's forgetfully, he says I forgot. We say that's not an excuse. You can't forget. As in, you can forget, but you have to make it up. As for the wajib, if it is forgotten, then it can be fixed up with sujood sahl. And then sunan, if they're left off, then there's nothing upon the person. His salah is valid. طيب, the arkan are 14. The arkan are 14. He's going to say وَجُمْلَةُ أَرْكَانِهَا 14. He says number 1, al-qiyam. The first pillar of salah is al-qiyam, for the person to stand up. And we say al-qiyam fil fard. That's the rukn. Qiyam, standing in salat al-fard, is a rukn. It's the rukn. The Prophet ﷺ says صَلِّ قَائِمًا. The Prophet ﷺ says pray standing. So it's a command. Therefore they took it's a rukn. The second, he says وَالتَّحْرِيمَ, meaning takbirat al-ihram, Allahu Akbar. That is also a rukn. And then we have al-Fatiha. The third rukn of salah is al-Fatiha. The Prophet ﷺ says لا صلاة لمن لم يقرأ بفاتحة الكتاب. There is no salah for the person who doesn't recite the Fatiha. So the third rukn is al-Fatiha. طيب, going back to the first rukn, al-Qiyam. What is the minimum amount of qiyam that we say this person is now standing? That's it. So long as he's not in ruku'. So long as he's not in the position of ruku', we say he's standing. Another thing they mention is that if he was to lean on a wall, let's say he's leaning on this wall and he's standing, we say that if that wall was to be removed and he would fall due to that, then we say that his standing is invalid. Because his standing he's seeking help from the wall. So he's not really standing, he's leaning. However, let's say he's leaning on the wall, but if the wall was to be removed, he'd still remain standing. Then we say his standing is valid. Do you understand? Then he says after al-Fatiha, he says وَالرُّكُوعِ. The fourth rukn of salah is al-ruku', for the person to do ruku'. The Prophet ﷺ says ثُمَّ ارْكَعْ حَتَّى تَطْمَئِنَّ رَاكِعًا. He says to the musi' salatih, the one who came to the masjid, Prophet ﷺ was teaching him salah, he said to him, ثُمَّ ارْكَعْ. After you finish reciting the Quran, go into ruku'. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا ارْكَعُوا وَاسْجُدُوا. And then he says, وَالْاعْتِدَالُ عَنْهُ. The next rukn is after ruku', for you to stand up from ruku'. That's the next rukn. So let's say a person was ruku' and then he went straight to sujood. We say he missed a rukn, which is to come back up. The Prophet ﷺ says, ثُمَّ ارْفَعْ حَتَّى تَعْتَدِلَ قَائِمًا. He says to the musi' salatih, and this hadith is very important by the way. There's a few hadith in each bab that have to be memorized, have to be memorized. Of them is this one. That the Prophet ﷺ said, after ruku', he says, ثُمَّ ارْفَعْ, يعني come back up, حَتَّى تَعْتَدِلَ قَائِمًا, until you have stood up fully. So that's the next rukn. Then the sixth rukn, he says, was sujood. The next rukn is a sujood, for the person to go into sujood. As we said in the ayah, يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا ارْكَعُوا وَاسْجُدُوا. And the Prophet ﷺ says, ثُمَّ اسْجُدْ حَتَّى تَطْمَئِنَّ سَاجِدًا. Make sujood until you are settled in the sujood position. Then he says, وَالْاعْتِدَالُ عَنْهُ. The next rukn after sujood is to come back up from sujood. Then the next rukn is al-julusu bayna as-sajdatayn, for the person to sit between the two sujood. Now he's in sujood, that's a rukn. Coming back up is a rukn. And sitting, remaining seated is a rukn. That's 3 arkan, 3 separate. Then he says, number 9, at-tuma'nina. What's tuma'nina? For the person to be tranquility. No, not in this context. To be content in that position. He needs to settle in that position for an amount of time. But what's the minimum of tuma'nina? 10 seconds. Huh? So if I want to say Subhana Rabbil Azim once. No, but I can say it once. No, but I can. If I want to do the minimum, I say it once. Does that take 10 seconds? I say Subhana Rabbil Azim and I get back up. No, but you can say it once. Right. Tuma'nina, to be honest, the Hanbali, they have a slight difference of the ta'rif tuma'nina. Some of them, they say that it's as-sukunu, most of them they say huwa as-sukunu in qal. It's for the person to be settled in that position, even if it's for a small amount of time. So long as he's settled for a small amount of time, then they call that tuma'nina. He's established that rukn. And the second qawl, which is actually it's a better principle, to be honest, but the sad part is that Hanbali, they didn't agree with him. Sheikh Al-Hajjawi, the person who wrote Zad al-Mustaqni' and Iqna', he says at-tuma'nina, and also Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah agreed with him in this. He says at-tuma'nina is بقدر ما يأتي فيه بالذكر الوارد إذا كان ذاكرا. What does that mean? I repeat. He says الطمأنينة هي أن يأتي بالذكر الوارد إذا كان ذاكرا. So for example, sujood, to explain it, he says sujood, to establish طمأنينة in sujood is for you to stay for an amount of time that would be enough for you to say the minimum dhikr. Does that make sense? So he would say that طمأنينة is for you to go into sujood and stay for the amount of Subhan Rabbi al-A'la and come back up. That's tuma'nina. According to who? Hajjawi, rahimahullah. And like I said, most of them, they say that it's a sukun wa inqal. There's a slight thing that builds up from this, which is what? That if the person, according to the first ta'rif, if we say sukun wa inqal, that if you stay, even for a short amount of time, that the person could stay for a short amount of time but not say the dhikr. He could stay for a short amount of time yet not say the dhikr. But when you go to the second ta'rif, we say that it's the minimum amount that he can say the dhikr, the minimum, yani once. And to be honest, I like the second ta'rif. It's more, it gives you a principle that so long as you can say Subhan Rabbil Azim, that you've established tuma'nina, you can come back up. But unfortunately, some of the Hanbali got angry at Shaykh Al-Hajjaj. No? The first is sukun wa inqal, for you to stay even for a small amount of time. That's tuma'nina. That is tuma'nina. And that's what Al-Futuhi mentioned in Al-Muntaha, and Al-Hajjawi mentioned the other thing in Iqna'. And those are the two main books. So if Muntaha and Iqna' disagree, which one do we put forward? Muntaha. And that's why they left behind Al-Hajjawi in this mas'ala. Then he says, وَالتَّشَهُدُ الْأَخِيرِ. And طمأنينة, this is the hadith of al-Musi' Salatih. That's why the Prophet ﷺ sent him to pray again. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he came and he said salam to the Prophet ﷺ, then he said to him, ارجع فصلي فإنك لم تصل. Then he came back, فسلم على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال ارجع فصلي فإنك لم تصلي. He kept coming to the Prophet ﷺ saying salam alaikum. Prophet ﷺ said, go back and pray, for you have not prayed. And then he went back, he prayed. Then the Prophet ﷺ said to him, pray again, because you have not prayed. And then the man said, Ya Rasulullah, this is what I know. This is what I know, فَعَلِّمْني. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he specified to him that in each rukn, fi'li, that there must be طمأنينة. What do you mean by rukn fi'li? A rukn, which is an action. طيب, a rukn qawli, is there طمأنينة in rukn qawli? Can we say there's طمأنينة in Fatiha? Or طمأنينة in Taslim? There's no طمأنينة in that. طمأنينة is only al-arkan al-fi'liya. The arkan which are actions. So, السجود, الركوع, الاعتدال من الركوع, coming back up from the ruku'. Those are the arkan which طمأنينة must be established in. So each time the Prophet ﷺ, then the Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, كبر للصلاة ثم اقرأ ما معك من القرآن ثم اركع حتى تطمئن راكعا ثم ارفع حتى تعتدل قائما ثم اسجد حتى تطمئن ساجدا ثم افعل ذلك في صلاتك كلها. حديث أبو هريرة. The 10th rukn, he says, التشهد الأخير. The last tashahud. The last tashahud. That is a rukn. And then he says وجلسته. Also sitting for the tashahud al-akhir. So within that we say that tashahud, which is التحيات لله الصلوات والطيبات, that is a rukn. The Prophet ﷺ, he says وإذا جلس أحدكم فليقل التحيات لله. So they said the al-amr يقتضي الوجوب. Therefore they said it's a rukn. The amr here, the Prophet ﷺ saying say, they took from it that is a rukn. And then he says وجلسته, that he should be seated for it. And then he says وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. The 12th rukn is to send salah upon the Prophet ﷺ. What's the minimum? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. What's the complete form? Salat al-Ibrahimiyya. Which hadith? Whose hadith? We said Hanbali, they have a favored one. Hadith Ka'b ibn Ujra. الصلاة على النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he'd say اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. And this is from the mufradat actually. The Hanabila, they make it a rukn to send salam. The others, they say is sunnah. The 13th rukn is at-taslimatan. Now, yes, that's why he says at-taslimatan, and he didn't say at-taslim, because the Hanabila say that both salam is a rukn. Both taslim is rukn. So you do one to the right, and you do another one to the left, both is rukn. And of that, they base a few masail, which is if a person does one taslim, then his salah, he does one taslim. No, we said both salam is rukn. If both salam is rukn, according to this, if the person does one salam, what happens? The salah is invalid. طيب, they say that التسليمتان is rukn in fard and nafila. It's rukn whether it's fard or nafila. He must do both taslim. Now one mistake that based off this is the people who are making up salah, they missed rak'ah with the imam. They stand up after the first taslim. We say you haven't followed the imam till the end of his salah, because the second taslim is a rukn. So what do we say in this case? The Hanabali, they say salatu tanqalib naflan. The salah, his salah turns into a nafl. Oh, no, yeah. Unless he thinks that one taslim is the rukn. Yeah, unless. But let's say the person, he's ammi, he doesn't know anything, and he just follows these lessons, for example. Yeah? And then he stands up after the first taslim. Then they say, Salatu tanqalib naflan. And it was from one of the masail that I actually found quite thrilling was that the Shaykh al-Fawzan was asked this question, and he agreed with the madhab. He said that Salatu tanqalib naflan. And a lot of the ulama, they disagree with that. That how can he start a salah with fard and it turns into a nafl without him intending it to turn into nafl? Anyway, so taslimatan is rukn. Except in al-janazah. They say where one taslim is the rukn. One taslim is the rukn. And then he says what tartib. The 14th is a tartib. For him to pray the salah with these arkan in order. طيب, now he moves on to the wajibat. And we have 8. He says وواجباتها ثمانية. He says التكبير, the first one is التكبير غير التحريمة. The first wajib is all of the other takbirat other than takbirat al-ihram. So the takbirat of transitioning, al-intiqal, he's moving from ruku' to sujood, or he's moving, ruku' to, he says Sam'a Muhammad, or he's standing, he's going to sujood, that takbir, and then he's coming up to sit, that takbir. Those takbirat are all wajib. They're all wajib. As for takbirat al-ihram, it's a rukn. Takbirat al-ihram is a rukn. طيب, if a person leaves off takbirat al-ihram, what's up with his salah? Batil. Batil. He prayed his salah without takbirat al-ihram. طيب, batil, I understand why you're saying that, but more precise, we say his salah didn't begin. Salah lam tanaqid. The salah didn't begin for us to say there's something invalid. The salah didn't even commence. طيب, as for if he leaves takbirat al-intiqal, then we say his salah is not valid, he's left off a wajib, he can make it up with sujood sahw. Right. We have, let's say, 4 types of takbir. We have takbirat al-ihram, which is rukn. The takbirat al-ihram is a rukn. And also add to that, the takbirat of salat al-janazah, all of them are arkan. All 4 takbirat of salat al-janazah are arkan. And then you have takbirat al-intiqal, the takbir of moving from position to position, that is wajib. And then you have the takbirat of salat al-eid, the additional takbirat. Those are sunnah. And then we have another takbir, which is the person who joins the imam when he's in ruku'. We say the first takbir is rukn. The second takbir is intiqal for him, but it's sunnah. The only takbir is intiqal, which is sunnah. So, the person joins the imam's in ruku'. He does takbirat al-ihram, Allahu Akbar. And then he does another takbir to go to ruku'. We say the second takbir is sunnah and is not wajib. So if he does takbirat al-ihram by itself and he goes into ruku', then we say that's valid. If he does both, then we say the second one is sunnah. Then he says what tasmi', for the person to say sami'a Allahu liman hamidah, that is a wajib. Then the next he says what tahmid, to say sami'a Allahu liman hamidah. The Prophet says قولوا فقولوا سمع الله لمن حمده. He took from that it's wajib. Then he says وتسبيح الركوع وسجود, to say سبحان ربي الأعلى in sujood and سبحان ربي العظيم in ruku'. Both are wajib. The wajib is to say it once. The sunnah is to say it 3 times or more. They took the wujub, as we took last week, they took the fact that it's wajib from the hadith when فسبح اسم ربك العظيم came down. The Prophet ﷺ says اجعلوها في ركوعكم, and when سبح اسم ربك الأعلى came down, the Prophet ﷺ says اجعلوها في سجودكم. When the ayah of سبح اسم ربك الأعلى came down, the Prophet ﷺ said make that one in your sujood. And when سبح اسم ربك العظيم came down, the Prophet ﷺ said make that one in your ruku'. Then he says وقوله رب اغفر لي مرة. Then between the 2 sajdat, for him to say ربي اغفر لي, for him to say ربي اغفر لي. And then he says التشهد الأول The seventh wajib is tashahud al-awwal. طيب, why did they say tashahud al-akhir is rukn and tashahud al-awwal is wajib? Why didn't they say both are arkan? Why is tashahud al-awwal not a rukn? Why is it not a pillar? And it's just wajib. And it's a grade lower. No. No, we say because we have a dalil. The Prophet ﷺ, I think the hadith of Mu'adh bin Jabal, he left off tashahud al-awwal and he didn't come back to it. And if it was a rukn, then he'd have to come back to it. If it's a pillar, you can't say, I'm going to forget that pillar, you have to go back. But as for the tashahud al-awwal, when the Prophet ﷺ forgot it, he didn't go back to it, showing that it's not a pillar. But the fact that he done sujood al-sahu shows that it's wajib. Then he says, وَجَلْسَتُهُ, and sitting for tashahud al-awwal, that is also a wajib. Then he says, وَمَا عَدَى ذَلِكَ وَالشُّرُوطَ سُنَّةً. Now he says, everything other than what we mentioned, the arkan, 14, and the wajibat, 8, and the conditions, 6, that we took a while ago. Other than that, everything else is sunnah. Everything else is sunnah. Then he says, فَالرُّكْنُ وَالشَّرْطُ لَا يَسْقُطَانِ سَهْوًا وَجَهْلًا. Now the rukn, as we spoke about in the beginning, the pillars are never excused of. Whether you left it off forgetfully, or you said, I didn't know, the pillar, leaving off a pillar is never excused. Similarly, a shart, condition, you're never excused for leaving off a condition. Except if there's a udhr. Except if there is a udhr, an excuse. Except for one shart. One shart, never ever, you're never excused of it. If he leaves off wajibat intentionally, the salat's batil, yes. And there's no sujood sahu for that, we're going to take it. But what was my question? There's one shart which there is no excuse for leaving it off. No excuse to leave off. No excuse. A niyyah. A niyyah. Can someone say, oh sir, I forgot to make niyyah? No, niyyah is never excused. Al-Hajjawi, Zad, he said, وَمَا عَدَ ذَلِكَ وَالشُّرُوطَ وَالْأَرْكَانِ no, he said, وَمَا عَدَ الشَّرَائِطَ وَالْأَرْكَانَ سُنَّةً غَيْرَ النِّيَّةِ فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَسْقُطُ بِحَالٍ. And niyyah never ever, the person is never excused. Then he says, وَيَسْقُطُ الْوَاجِبُ بِهِمَا. Al-wajib, the 8 that we just took, they can be left off due to forgetfulness. And we say the salat doesn't become invalid. And they can also be left off if the person was ignorant of it. If the person was ignorant of it. And he can fix the salah through sujood al-sahu. Sujood al-sahu. Now he says, now that we spoke a bit about sujood al-sahu, he says, فَصْلٌ وَيُشْرَعُ سُجُودُ السَّهْوِ لِزِيَادَةٍ وَنَقْصٍ وَشَكٍ لَا فِي عَمْدٍ. Sujood al-sahu, the ulama rahimahullah, they say sujood al-sahu هو من باب إضافة الشيء إلى سببه. The sujood, as in, it is attributing to the sujood to its reason. Its reason being forgetfulness. That the person forgets something, therefore he does sujood in order to make up the deficiency in the salah. And to summarize a little bit so that we can understand, because sometimes this bab can be a bit tricky. We say that the first, he says, يشرع سجود السهو لزيادة. Now زيادة, which is to add something to the salah. We put that into 2 categories. We say if the addition in salah is from the actions of salah. As they say, min jins salah. For example, he added a ruku', or he added a rak'ah, or he added a sujood. Then this, if he does it intentionally, we say the salah is batil. He intentionally done 2 ruku's, or he intentionally done 3 sujood. Then we say if he does it intentionally, it's batil. And we say if he does it forgetfully, he forgot and he done 3 sujood. then we say he can fix it with sujood as-sahw. Sujood as-sahw. And then we say, if the addition is from actions which are outside of the salah, for example, he's touching his beard or he's fixing his thobe, we say if that ziyada is yasira, if it's a small amount, it doesn't invalidate the salah. And there's no sujood sahw for it. And if it is a lot, then it invalidates the salah. طيب, that's ziyada. So far we spoke about what? Ziyada, addition. How did we split it? We said if it's from the actions of salah, we said if it's intention, he intended it, then invalid. If he didn't intend it, he can fix it with sujood sahw. طيب, he added actions from outside of the salah. Then we say if it's a small amount, then it's not invalid. And if he does it, if the actions outside salah are a lot, then it invalidates the salah. No, he doesn't do sujood sahw. Then he says وَنَقْصٍ. And also we have ziyada, if he adds aqwal. If he adds aqwal. Again, we split into two. If the aqwal are from the adhkar of the salah, they're from the adhkar of the salah, then the salah doesn't become invalid. طيب, does he do sujood sahw? It's sunnah for him to do sujood sahw. It's not wajib. It's not. Aqwal, statements. So for example, in ruku' he recited Fatiha. Or in sujood, he recited tashahhud. Then in this case, we say that the salah is not invalid, and it's sunnah for him to do sujood sahw, but not a must. And then if it's from outside the aqwal of salah, he spoke to someone, whether it was forgetfully or not, it invalidates the salah. So in salah, he spoke to someone, and then he remembered. Then we say salah is invalid, that's it. So that's ziyada. And then we have a naqs. Naqs, if he's left off a rukn, a pillar, then we say the salah cannot be valid until he does that rukn. And if he leaves off a wajib, then if he has begun the rukn after it, then he doesn't go back to the wajib, he just does sujood sahw. Rukn. Yeah, he's going to mention it, which is if he starts the Fatiha, Hanbali say if he starts the Fatiha of the next rak'ah, then the first rak'ah cancelled. That's what the Hanbali say. Sheikh Sa'di and Uthaymeen, they have another opinion. I'm going to mention it, inshallah. Then he says, وَشَك. A shak is if he is doubtful of whether he done a rukn or not. And not if he doubted if he done a wajib or not. If he has doubt in a wajib, then we say there's no sujood sahw for that. But there is sujood sahw if he's in doubt. He says, did I do 2 sujood or 1? So here we say, number 1, in the time of doubt, you always build upon that which is less. So if you're in doubt, did I do 2 sujood or 1? Which one are we certain of? 1. So you do 1 more sujood. And once you do that sujood, in the end you do sujood sahw. Because you're in doubt. Shak. Write down. I need to get through. Then he says, لا في عمد. لا في عمد. Meaning that sujood sahw is not legislated for someone who intended to do something wrong in the salah. For example, he intentionally added a sujood. Then we say salah is invalid and there is no sujood sahw. You can't fix it with sujood sahw. The whole point, look at the name, sujood sahw. The sujood is because of forgetfulness. But he said, no, I'm going to do 3 sujood. We say the salah is invalid and there's no sujood sahw. He left off a wajib intentionally. He left off, for example, tashahhud al-awwal. Or he left off Subhan Rabbi al-A'la on purpose. Then we say there's no sujood sahw. And the salah becomes invalid. You've left it off intentionally. Then he says, وَهُوَ وَاجِبٌ لِمَا تَبْطُلُ بِتَعَمُّدِهِ. This is a principle. And it makes life so much easier if we understand this principle. He says, وَهُوَ وَاجِبٌ لِمَا تَبْطُلُ بِتَعَمُّدِهِ. Meaning that the action which you done in a time of forgetfulness, that sujood al-sahw is wajib for it. Had you done that intentionally, it would have invalidated the salah. Does that need repeating? Okay. He says that sujood al-sahw is wajib for something which you do forgetfully. Had you done that thing intentionally, then it would have invalidated your salah. Does that make sense? So for example, let's give an example. Someone intended to leave off one sujood. He intended it. So we say, if now you forgot to do two sujood, then sujood al-sahw is wajib. Do we understand the principle? Does it make sense? Sujood al-sahw becomes wajib for the forgetfulness, which if it was intended, it would have invalidated the salah. I hope we've understood. طيب. Then he says, وَسُنَّةً. So the ahkam sujood al-sahw are three. Wajib, sunnah and mubah. He comes to the second, he says, وَسُنَّةً لِإِتْيَانٍ بِقَوْلٍ مَشْرُوعٍ فِي غَيْرِ مَحَلِّهِ سَهْوًا وَلَا تَبْطُلُ بِتَعَمُّدِهِ. The second is the sujood al-sahw, which is sunnah, which is if he says a dhikr in another place other than its legislated place. Like we said, if he recited Fatiha in sujood, or he recited tashahud when he should have recited Fatiha, or he recites Subhana Rabbi al-A'la in ruku', or Subhana Rabbi al-Azim in sujood, then this, we say sujood al-sahw is sunnah for this person, and it's not wajib. It's not wajib. And he says, وَلَا تَبْطُلُ بِتَعَمُّدِهِ. Yani if the person on purpose, he read Fatiha in sujood, or on purpose he read tashahud in his qiyam, and they say the salah doesn't become invalid through that. The reason being, they say, is because it's a dhikr min adhkar salah. However, he's not allowed to do that. But the mas'ala is, does the salah become invalid or not? They say the salah doesn't become invalid. Then he says, وَمُبَاحٌ لِتَرْكِ سُنَّةٍ. The third is mubah, yani the sujood sahw is allowed. Allowed meaning it's not sunnah, nor is it wajib, it's just allowed. That third one is if the person leaves off a sunnah. If the person leaves off sunnah. Why did they say it's mubah? They just said it's allowed. They didn't say sunnah. If you leave off the sunnah, then it's sunnah for you to do the sujood sahw. Why didn't they say that? Rather they say it's mubah. It's just allowed, permissible. No, but the reason they say that is because who in his salah prays with all the sunnah? So therefore, if we make it sunnah for you to do the sujood al-sahw, for every sunnah you leave off, you're going to probably do sujood al-sahw every salah. Because are you able to come with all the sunnah for every salah? It's difficult. It's very difficult. So therefore they said it's mubah. It's mubah. Shaykh Sa'di rahimahullah, he has a beautiful opinion. He says that sujood al-sahw is sunnah if he leaves off a sunnah that he's used to doing. For example, the person, he is used to saying Subhana Rabbi al-A'la 3 times. When he was in sujood, he said it once, which is fine. But he usually says it 3 times. He forgot. Then they say, Shaykh Sa'di rahimahullah, he says that in his case, it's sunnah for him to do sujood sahw because he left off a sunnah that he usually does. Does that make sense? طيب, then he says, وَمَحَلُّهُ. Now this mas'ala is it always causes problems. He says, وَمَحَلُّهُ قَبْلَ السَّلَامِ نَدْبًا. When does the person do sujood sahw? Before salam or after salam? And the whole discussion, if he's إذا كان عن نقص إذا كان عن زيادة. The Hanbali's opinion is very easy. They say that it's always sunnah to do sujood al-sahw before the salam. Always. Except in one case. We're going to speak about it. But they say always the sujood al-sahw is sunnah when? Before the salam. Before the salam. And the reason why this is easy, because some people, they get confused if his mistake is a ziyada or a naqs. Some people, they make a mistake and then he has a battle in his mind and he's thinking, my mistake, was it ziyada or is it naqs? And then he's thinking, so when do I do sujood sahw? And that's why they say nadban. So let's say that someone made a mistake in salah and he done sujood sahw after salam or before salam. We say that it's fine, both is fine. The discussion is which one is sunnah. But if he done sujood sahw after salam, then we say it's fine. He's done sujood sahw. Or he done it before salam when it was supposed to be after salam. We say it's also fine. All of that discussion is which one is mustahab. But none of it is wajib. Then he says, إلا إذا سلم عن نقص ركعة فأكثر فبعده ندبا. The only case in which sujood al-sahw is after the salam is if he does salam before finishing the salah. Meaning that, مثلا in dhuhr, rather than praying 4 rak'at, he done taslim after 2 rak'at or after 3 rak'at. And then he realized. Then in his case, sujood al-sahw is sunnah when? After the salam. And that's why in the hadith of Dhul Yadayn, the Prophet ﷺ, he prayed one of dhuhr or asr, and he done salam after 2 rak'at. And then when he came to fix the salah, he said, the Rawi, Abu Hurairah, he says, ثم سلم ثم سجد مثل سجوده أو أطول. That he done salam and then he done sujood. And this was because the Prophet ﷺ ended the salah before its time. So they say, إذا سلم قبل إتمامها, if he does salam before completing the salah, the sujood is when? After the salam. Then he says, وإن سلم قبل إتمامها عمدا بطلت. طيب, if the person for dhuhr, he's supposed to pray 4 rak'at. He done salam after 2 rak'at intentionally. We say his salah is invalid. Then he says, وسهوا فإن ذكر قريبا أتمها وسجد وإن أحدث أو قهقها بطلت كفعلهما في صلبها. Now, let's say that he done salam before the salah should end, but forgetfully. For example, rather than praying 4 rak'at for dhuhr, he prayed 2 and he said Assalamu alaikum. He said Assalamu alaikum. What does he do in this case? They say that he completes upon what he has prayed already. So he comes back and he prays 2 more rak'at. But if he remembers in a short amount of time, not the next day. For example, next day someone told him, by the way, you prayed 2 rak'at. Then in this case we say, no, you repeat the whole salah. But if he remembers within a short period of time, he adds the 2 rak'at which he missed. طيب, then he says, وَإِنْ أَحْدَثَ أَوْ قَهْقَهَا بَطَلَتْ كَفِعْلِهِمَا فِي صُلْبِهَا. Now this person that prayed 2 rak'at rather than 4, let's say after his salam, he lost his wudu. And then he made wudu. When he comes back to pray now, do we say to him, add 2 rak'at? No, we say to him, you start the salah again. Because they say that the hadath now in this case, losing the wudu, is as if you've lost wudu in the salah. So you've invalidated the salah. And also if he laughs, after he finished those 2 rak'at, he started speaking to his friend and he started laughing. Then we say, it's as if you've laughed in the salah. So now when you come to repeat the salah, you repeat it fully. And you don't just come and add 2 rak'at. And then also they say that, the Hanbali, they say that also al-kalam. And they don't differentiate. They say if you speak in that period, then you must pray all again. So let's say the person, he prayed 2 rak'at, he said Assalamu alaikum, Assalamu alaikum. And then he was supposed to pray 4. Before he was reminded, he started speaking to someone behind him. Then we say, it's as if you have spoken in the salah. So that you repeat the full salah. Al-Hajjawi rahimahullah, again, he differentiates between if the kalam is li maslahat salah or not. He says, basically, so look, let's say I'm imam, I've prayed 4 rak'at, and I prayed 2 rak'at rather than 4 for dhuhr. Then after I done salam, the brother said to me, you prayed 2 rak'at. You need to stand up and pray 2 more. And then I ask someone else, I say, did I pray 2? And then you say yes. Now I've spoken, he's spoken. But they say this kalam, this speech, is in the benefit of salah. So Imam al-Hajjawi, he says that this type of speech doesn't invalidate, and you can add 2 rak'at. The Hanabila, they say whether you speak لمصلحة الصلاة or غير مصلحة الصلاة, that it invalidates. But the hadith of Dhul Yadayn, again, it is a dalil for this. The Prophet ﷺ, in this situation, he prayed 2 raka'at rather than 4. Then the Dhul Yadayn came up to him. He said, Ya Rasulullah, anasita am qasurat as-salah? He said, oh Rasulullah, did you forget the other 2 raka'at? Or has salah now been shortened? The Prophet ﷺ spoke. He said back to him, he said, Lam ansa wa lam tuqsar. The Prophet ﷺ said, I didn't forget. And nor has salah been shortened. So they both spoke. The Prophet ﷺ spoke. And then the Prophet ﷺ looked around and he asked. He said, أَكَمَا يَقُولُ ذُو الْيَدَيْنِ, يعني, is Dhul Yadayn right? And then they said, نعم يا رسول الله. So the speech here is لِمَصْلَحَةِ الصَّلَاةِ, for the benefit of salah. Then the Prophet ﷺ added 2 raka'at. He didn't add 4. So the differentiation between if the kalam, the speech, if it is for the benefit of salah or not, that is more what the adilla, the evidences show. And that's, however, like we said, the Hanbali say, any kalam, he must start the whole salah again. Then he says, وَإِن نَفَخَ أَوْ انْتَحَبَ لَا مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ أَوْ تَنَحْنَحَ بِلَا حَاجَةٍ فَبَانَ حَرْفَانِ بَطَلَتْ. Now if the person in the salah, he blows without need. And he says, فَبَانَ حَرْفَانِ. And from that process, he's now uttered 2 letters. For example, uff, that's the alif and fa. They say that is kalam now. It's just like kalam. In Zad, he says, وَقَهْقَهَةٌ كَكَلَامٍ. Also if he laughs. Or he says, أَوْ انْتَحَبَ لَا مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. He cries in the salah, but not from the fear of Allah. He's crying because he lost his job. He's crying because his football team lost. In the salah he's crying. But not for khashyatillah, not because of fear of Allah. Then this invalidates the salah. Then he says, أو تنحنح بلا حاجة. التنحنح is like that. To do that in salah, without need. However, if you are in need, then it doesn't invalidate the salah. He says, فَبَانَ حَرْفَانِ بَطَلَتْ. If in this process 2 letters come out of him, then we say the salah is invalid. Because they say that mostly in the Arabic language, the minimum amount of letters needed for a word is 2. On the most part. Sometimes the word can be 1 letter. But mostly, the minimum is 2. Akh, ab, all 2 letters. He's been Ajrumiya lessons are yes, it's not kalam, but it's a kalima. It's not kalam according to the Nahwiyin, but it's a kalima. Yeah. If he's crying because he lost someone, then that also invalidates the salah. Even the janazah. However, they say if he tries to contain himself, then it doesn't invalidate it. But if he just lets himself go, then that invalidates salah. But if he's trying to contain himself, but they say غَلَبَهُ الْبُكَاء, the crying has now overpowered him, overwhelmed him. Then in that case, some of them they say it doesn't invalidate the salah. Then he says, وَمَنْ تَرَكَ رُكْنًا غَيْرَ التَّحْرِيمَةِ فَذَكَرَهُ بَعْدَ شُرُوعِهِ فِي قِرَاءَةِ رَكْعَةٍ أُخْرَى بطلت المتروك منها وصارت التي شرع في قراءتها مكانها. Now if someone leaves off a rukn and then he remembers that he left off the rukn when he started reciting Fatiha for the next rak'ah. Example, someone left off 1 sujood. He left off a sajda. When he got to the next rak'ah and he started reciting Fatiha, he remembered, oh, I left the sujood. What does he do in this case? He continues. They say he continues and he counts the first rak'ah as cancelled. Now the rak'ah he's in is his first rak'ah. He cancels the first rak'ah. Does that make sense? That's the Hanabila. Sheikh Sa'di and I think Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah, they say that he goes back so long as he hasn't reached that rukn in the next rak'ah. Does it make sense? For example, he left off sajda. They say that he goes back to the sajda so long as he hasn't reached the sujood of the next rak'ah. That makes sense? So which one has more time? The first qawl or the second opinion? The second opinion, he's got more time. The first opinion is that they say if he recites the Fatiha, that's it. He can't go back, he cancels the first rak'ah. طيب, if he remembers before Fatiha of the next rak'ah, he remembered that he left the sujood. What does he do? For example, he done one sujood, yeah? Then he stood up. He hasn't recited Fatiha yet, he stood up. And then now when he stood up, he remembered that he left the sujood. What should he do? He hasn't started Fatiha yet. If he remembers before the Fatiha, he goes back wujuban. He goes back to sujood wujuban. He must go back. Because he hasn't started in the Fatiha. He done the qiyam. Listen, we need to differentiate it. Now he's not left tashahud al-awwal. He's not left the wajib. He's left the rukn. Does it make sense? And now that he's in another rukn, it doesn't matter. Because both are arkan. If he hasn't started the Fatiha, he goes back to that sujood. And he prays, he does that sujood and everything after it. And then he comes back. Does that make sense? So he left off a sujood or a ruku' whatever it is. Rukn. He left off a rukn. He remembers it before reciting the Fatiha of the next rak'ah. He must go back. Wujuban. He must. He must go back and pray it and whatever's after it. And then he does sujood sahu. But if he starts Fatiha, then we said he cancels the first rak'ah and he makes it up after. Then he says, وَقَبْلَهُ يعني before Fatiha, وَقَبْلَهُ يَعُودُ فَيَأْتِي بِهِ وَبِمَا بَعْدَهُ. Meaning if he remembers before Fatiha, he goes back and he goes and does that rukn which he left off, the pillar which he left off, whether it's ruku' or sujood, whatever it is, he goes back. Then he says وَبَعْدَ سَلَامٍ فَكَتَرْكِ رَكْعَةٍ. Now if he remembers that he left that rukn after the salah, after salam. So he said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Then he remembered that in one of the rak'at he left off a sujood. Or in one rak'ah he didn't recite Fatiha. Or in one rak'ah he didn't do ruku'. Or he didn't come back up from ruku'. He left off a pillar. After the salah he remembered. Then we say, it's as if he's left off a whole rak'ah. So he makes up and he prays one rak'ah. That makes sense? So how many cases do we have? We have 3 cases. If he's left off a rukn, he remembered it after Fatiha. What does he do? He continues and he cancels the first rak'ah. He remembers the rukn before Fatiha. What does he do? He goes back. Wujuban. He must. He remembers after the salah. Then we say he repeats that rak'ah in which he left off that rukn. Then he says, وَإِنَّهَا ضَعًا plus sujood sahu, yes, plus sujood sahu. Then he says, وَإِنَّهَا ضَعًا تَشَهُدٍ أَوَّلَ نَاسِيًا لَزِمَ رُجُوعُهُ وَكُرِهَ إِنْ اسْتَتَمَّ قَائِمًا وَحَرُمَ وَبَطَلَتْ إِنْ شَرَعَ فِي الْقِرَاءَةِ لَا إِنْ نَسِيَ أَوْ جَهِلٍ. Now, he says that if the person leaves off tashahud al-awwal, he left off tashahud al-awwal. Tashahud al-awwal, is it a rukn or a wajib? Wajib. Forgetfully, rather than sitting for tashahud al-awwal, he stood up for the next rak'ah. In here we have 3 cases. One case, he must go back. Another case is makruh for him to go back. Another case is haram for him to go back. Number 1, where it's wajib, if he hasn't fully stood up, he's not fully stood up, then he remembered he didn't sit for tashahud al-awwal. We say it's wajib for him to go down. Wajib. What happens if he goes up? Huh? Yeah. But what, right now, if he remembers before he's completely stood up, and even though he remembered he stood up, what's the hukm? He left off a wajib amdan. He left off a wajib intentionally. Therefore the salah is batil. So he remembered midway, he must go back. طيب. Now he stood up fully. What's the ruling on him going back? Makruh. He started reciting Fatiha. What's the ruling going back? Haram. Haram. The reason why they differentiate between Fatiha and Qiyam, they say Qiyam is a rukn غير مقصود لذاته. As for the Fatiha, is a rukn which is maqsood لذاته. What does that mean? They say that the Qiyam, the rukn of standing, is not a pillar within itself, but it's a pillar for you to recite Fatiha. As for Fatiha, it's the pillar in which why standing is a pillar. Does that make sense? And the evidence for that is that Qiyam has a badal. If someone can't stand, he has an alternative. But Fatiha, does it have a badal? Can we say rather than Fatiha recite something else? No, Fatiha doesn't have a badal. Therefore they said that Al-Qiyam, standing, is a rukn which isn't intended for itself. So if he starts with the rukn, which the standing is a pillar for, which is the Fatiha, and he goes back, then we say that he invalidates his salah. Then he says, لا إن نسي أو جهل. Let's say the person knows the hukum, he knows the ruling, and even though he stood up and recited Fatiha, he went back. We say his salah is invalid. Batil. Let's say he knows the hukum, but at that time he forgot. He forgot. And when he stood up, recited Fatiha, he went back. Then we say that the salah is not invalid. And if he's ignorant of the hukum, same. We say the salah is not invalid. Then he says, وَيَتْبَعُ مَأْمُومٌ, meaning that the ma'moom, if his imam... كلها, he repeats it all. Because if he knows the hukum, then he's done something which is amd. And we said there's no sujood self amd. And the moment you do something that is amd, that invalidates the salah, you repeat the whole salah. It's coming. He says, وَيَتْبَعُ مَأْمُومٌ. Now he says that, let's say you're praying behind an imam who left tashahud al-awwal and he stood up. We say you follow him. You follow him. طيب, let's say he went back. Do you follow him? He came, he got up, he started reciting Fatiha. Do you follow him? No, you don't follow him. You don't follow him. But they say, ينفرد عنه. Just how we took in one of the last lessons, that you can intend to have left the salah with him and now you're praying by yourself. Then he says, وَيَجِبُ السُّجُودُ لِذَلِكَ مُطْلَقًا. Sujood in all three cases. Whether he's got up and then went back, or if he didn't fully stand up, then he went back, or if he recited Fatiha and stayed standing. In all three cases, sujood sahw is wajib. In all three cases. Then he says, and also, usually they bring this example, but this is the qa'idah for all the wajibat. All 8 wajibat. If he leaves it, then he must go back and do it so long as he's not busy with the next rukn. For example, someone is in sujood, he forgot to say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. And then he got up, but he didn't fully sit down. And he remembered whilst he's coming up. He remembered he didn't say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la. What must he do? He must go back. But after he sat down fully, now he's in another rukn. Can he go back? No, he says haram for him to go back. So that's with all the wajibat, all the wajibat. Then he says, وَيَبْنِي عَلَى الْيَقِينِ وَهُوَ الْأَقَلْ مِنْ مَنْ شَكَّ فِي رُكْنٍ أَوْ عَدَدٍ. Then he says, and this is a qa'idah that is taken from the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, من شك في صلاته أصلى 3 أو 4 فليطرح الشك وليبني على ما استيقن وليسجد سجدتين للسهو. Now, this happens a lot. Someone is in salah, so let's say he's in salat dhuhr. He doesn't know, did he pray 3 rak'at or 4 rak'at? What does he build upon? What does he take? The minimum. Because that's the yaqeen. That's what we're certain of. We're certain we prayed 3. We're unsure about the 4th. So we say add a rak'ah and then do sujood as-sahw. And then he says وَهُوَ الْأَقَلْ. Similarly, the person who has a shak in whether he done a rukn or not. He's in doubt. Did I do this rukn? Did I recite Fatiha in the first rak'ah or not? Or he has a shak. Did he do 2 sujood or not? They say من شك في ترك ركن فكتركه. If he has doubt that he's left off a rukn, then it's as if he's left it. It's as if he's left it. So what does he do? He does that rak'ah. He does that rak'ah. طيب, and if he's got shak, if he done a wajib or not, then we say there's no sujood as-sahw. There's no sujood as-sahw. Then he says, أو وهو الأقل من شك في ركن أو عدد. Yes, we explained that. Then he says, والله أعلم. Now, if there's questions, we can ask. Can't hear. Yeah, what are you saying? Yeah. They're saying Subhanallah. Hmm. So say it again now, just so, because I didn't. He sat after the. So he prayed 2 rak'at. And then he done 1 sujood only. And then he started doing tashahhud. Yeah. He went to sujood. The second one that he left. Yeah. He done his sujood. Then that's fine. Where qira'ah? Ah. This sujood that he done is sunnah. It's sunnah. Because what did he do? He added a dhikr in out of his place. But here another thing, which is that in that time he didn't say Rabbi Ghfirli. Does it make sense? No, because if he done tashahhud, it means he didn't say Rabbi Ghfirli. Tashahhud. That means he's left off. They reminded him and he went to sujood. طيب, if he's left off, Allahu A'lam, this we need to ask the Imam. If he left off Rabbi Ghfirli, maybe out of panic, subhanallah, he didn't think that he needs to say Rabbi Ghfirli, he went to sujood. And I think that's what most likely might have happened. We say here the sujood is wajib because he left Rabbi Ghfirli. But if he didn't, he said Rabbi Ghfirli, and then he done sujood, then the sujood is sunnah. There's nothing wrong with what he done, nothing. Yeah. That's it. طيب. No more questions. Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.